Senator Pillion? Here. Senator McPike? Here. Senator Eben? Senator Marsden? Senator Servo? Here. You have a quorum, Mr. Chairman.
You're being recorded, right? Yes. Welcome to the second meeting of the Subcommittee of General Government Subcommittee of the Senate Finance and Appropriations Committee. I guess we get a couple presentations from VRS today, and we're going to have a staff overview of our amendments. So I guess we'll do the VRS piece first. So who's going to take that? Hey, Trish. Welcome to the committee. Good to see you. Go Dukes.
Good morning. Thanks for the opportunity to be here. Staff asked when we were thinking about this presentation for me to provide a bit of an overview of VRS and then also talk a little bit about return to work, as well as some of the results from our working group that talked a little bit about judicial retirement. When we think about how we deliver benefits and services at VRS, two sort of guiding principles. We think about serving those who serve others and also helping our members plan for tomorrow today. The agenda is before you. At the end of the presentation, we've just put the VRS-related legislation. You can visit that at your leisure, but I'm also happy to take any questions related to that, but I won't plan to deliver that in my prepared comments. So beginning with VRS overview, we are the 14th largest public or private plan in the U.S., the 42nd largest in the world, and we serve over 800,000 active and retired members. Currently, the portfolio stands at about $109 billion. That's at the end of last week, unaudited. So this slide kind of gives you a snapshot of our total membership. And one of the things that you'll notice here are that we administer three plans, Plan 1 and Plan 2, which are your basic public pension plan. And then the hybrid retirement plan combines elements of a pension plan as well as a defined contribution plan, which is akin to a 401k style plan. The largest active group now is hybrid plan participants. You'll also notice that for the hybrid retirement plan, hazardous duty employees, for example, state police officers, Virginia law officers, as well as hazardous duty members in our local plans are not in the hybrid, and they go into Plan 2 when they are hired. The hybrid retirement plan started January 2014, and it sort of was developed as a way to share risk between employer and employee, as well as reduce the future cost of benefits for employers. When we think about how we deliver benefits and services at VRS, we use an external benchmarking service that compares our service as well as our cost to other public plan peers across the country and as well as across the world. At the most recent analysis conducted by CEM Benchmarking, we find ourselves in the the positive, desirable, high service, low administration cost quadrant. In fact, we deliver our benefits and services at 35% lower than our public plan peers. So just turning now to investments. Investments is a critical element of our overall responsibility. About 2/3 of benefit payments are funded through investment income. We are guided by provisions within the Constitution of Virginia, the Code of Virginia, and the Internal Revenue Code. Our fiduciary obligations ensure that we manage the trust with care, skill, and prudence and diligence. Also, we are to diversify the portfolio in order to minimize the risk of large losses. When we think about managing the trust, some key things that we think about is that ensuring access to the broadest opportunity set possible is in fact in the interest of our members and beneficiaries. So being prescribed what to invest in or what to divest from does impact our fiduciary duty. And when we think about how we invest for the highest level of return for a given level of risk. This pie chart gives you a picture of the portfolio as of June 30th. We are a fully diversified portfolio in a variety of different asset classes. And so one of the things to keep in mind is out of this trust, we pay out about $6 billion annually to members and beneficiaries. I'm often asked about performance, and one of the things that we try to keep in mind is that although in any given year markets can be up or down, but we want to think about investing for the long term because we will pay benefits for 20, 30, 40 years or more. And so we want to think about how the trust is performing over those longer term periods. So here you'll see that in each of the periods, with the exception of the 1 year period, VRS has outperformed our long-term assumed rate of return, which is 6.75% in all periods.
Ms. Bishop, I have a quick question.
Sure.
Back on your asset allocation.
Yes.
Do we provide any statutory guidance as to how you guys are to manage? I know you talked about the three sources of your duties or whatever, but every once in a while we get political pressure to try to push you guys around for political objectives in terms of how you manage your assets, what you invest in, and all that. Is there what's the general standard, and are there any other things we need to know about with regard to that?
Yeah, so we have long, the question relates to sort of prescribing what we can invest in. And the longstanding position of VRS is that we would not want those kinds of prescriptive elements to be put into statutory provisions. Currently, we have a prudent investor rule, which is consistent with code, and so we believe that any narrowing of our opportunity set, the things that we can invest in, is not to the benefit of our members and beneficiaries. And we really view things through more of an economic lens. We've had a few bills in the past. I've often said that we're equal opportunity offenders, whether they are asking us to divest from or invest in specific elements. The longstanding position of the Board of Trustees has been that we prefer to have access to the broadest opportunity set possible, and that's consistent with what most fiduciary experts would say is an appropriate lens to use when investing trust dollars.
So there aren't any restrictions other than general prescription to maximize return at a prudent rate or something like that?
Yes, and we are required to diversify the portfolio in order to, that is in code, in order to minimize risk.
Okay, and I see you guys, I assume real assets means real estate?
Yeah, generally real estate. Mm-hmm.
Okay. I assume you guys aren't invested in a certain shopping center in the city of Alexandria? There's a pension fund I've been hearing about a lot in the last week.
Yeah, we probably are.
But you don't know. Okay.
I'm not 100% sure since my side of the street is responsible for benefits, but and we have a lot of investments.
Got it. All right, thanks.
So I'll turn now to contributions and funded status. The contributions are critically important to the funding of the plan because when those contributions come in, we can invest them and get the income from those investments to pay benefits. Good news stories with respect to contribution rates, they're remaining fairly stable, and the recent infusions that you've made, as well as maintaining higher rates in the prior biennium have really improved plan health and helped to support rate stability. But unfunded liabilities still remain, and we're scheduled to pay those off over time. And as you know, the hybrid retirement plan does use this shared risk model, which will serve to lower the future benefit costs of that plan, as well as employer risk. One thing that we did last session related to the hybrid retirement plan is we passed legislation that will become effective this summer to separate how we do the contribution rate. In the past, we would blend the defined contribution and the defined benefit plan into one rate using an estimate for the defined contribution portion of that plan. Over the past decade, we've learned that that's created some reconciling issues for our employers, some processing errors. So we are separating those two elements where employers will pay the defined benefit portion separately from the defined benefit portion. And so to try to graphically share how the contribution rate is structured, giving you this little pie chart. The blue is the normal cost of the plan, which is what the ongoing cost to fund those benefits for folks are. The green portion is the amortization of our unfunded liability. So that's the biggest portion of the rate. And so when we think about the contribution rates, the more that we can do to reduce our unfunded liabilities, that green portion will shrink. There's a little sliver that's orange, and that relates to our administration cost for the plan. And then the yellow is that defined contribution portion, which is the employer match. And we're now going to pull that out and do that separately. So what that means in terms of contribution rates and funding is when you look at this slide in 23-24, for example, the state employee rate was 14.46. Now, going forward, the defined benefit rate will be 12.52, plus the DC portion that'll be separate, and that's on your far right column, which is 1.35. So in total, it'll be roughly 13.87 for a rate. So it's a little bit less than it was in the prior biennium. It'll vary a little bit depending on participant behavior, though.
Question about that. So, not exactly about that. I don't see a slide in here about employee contributions.
The member contributions are in statute, so they're 5% for members for Plan 1 and Plan 2. For the hybrid retirement plan, they do 4% to the defined benefit portion and 1% to the defined contribution portion.
But I thought there was a discretionary piece for the employees.
Right, and that's in the hybrid side. And so when you look at the defined contribution portion of that, I'm wondering if we put it in this deck. Oh, we didn't put it in this deck.
Right, that's what I was looking for.
Yeah, I can follow up with.
What I'm trying to get at is I'm trying to get a sense of what the employee contribution rates are like, given that we shifted over to this hybrid model in whatever it was 2012, and whether everybody's participating to the extent they should be, or whether there's other things we might need to do in the future to try to encourage better participation, and how that might compare with other states or private sector or what.
So couple things. The hybrid plan members will pay more. So they have a mandatory portion that's 5%, the 4 and 1. Then they have voluntary contributions that they can make that the employer can match. So, to max out in the hybrid retirement plan, the member would have to put in 9% of their pay, compared to a Plan 1 or Plan 2 just in the defined benefit, which is 5%. So they're having to pay more of their take-home pay in order to generate the same sort of income replacement ratio as a Plan 1 or Plan 2. There are some ways that could be changed. For example, we do an auto escalation every year because we have about a third of folks who are doing the max, which is good news. The less than good news is we have about 50% who are only doing the minimum or slightly more than the minimum. And so we auto-escalate people through that schedule every 3 years by 0.5%, but there's opportunities potentially to accelerate that. That's one option. You could also auto-enroll in the voluntary portion. For example, Georgia auto-enrolls folks in their plan that's similar, and they do it at the maximum. And they have very few opt-outs of that because it comes off the top, and folks don't necessarily opt out.
So 80% of the people either at the max or the minimum?
Yeah.
Okay, 20% in the middle, okay.
Yeah.
And also, at some point, just be curious what the 457 participation looks like, the 401A.
Yeah, the 457
Not-
participation has changed a good bit because it really now mostly applies to only our Plan 1 and Plan 2 members, because the hybrid retirement plan members will have a more robust employer match by doing their DC contributions. In fact, we encourage them to do that first so they can get the greater employer match, and then once they've maximized that, to then go to the 457 plan. And I can follow up. We have a good bit of data on the DC plans for you. So happy to do so. One of the things we talk about related to the health of the fund is funded status. It's sort of a common measure that's used that is a ratio of assets available to pay benefits compared to the liabilities. The good news here is we've been trending in the right direction. The blue bars here show the historical funded status. The green are estimates going forward, all things being equal. So for the state employee plan, as of June 30th, the state plan was about 80.2% funded. One of the things that we want to keep in mind is that we still have $5.8 billion in unfunded liabilities that remain in that plan. So making progress, but and how we fund those $5.8 billion was that portion of the pie chart that I showed you that was roughly 8% of the contribution rate. Teachers are a similar story. In the teacher plan, as of June 30th, it was about 80.8% funded. Again, the trend is moving in the right direction thanks to the funding discipline that you've demonstrated and the infusions that you've made to help reduce unfunded liabilities. The teacher plan has about $11.3 billion in unfunded liabilities. We also administer other post-employment benefits, also known as OPEBs. These are your group life, your health insurance, credit, and the Virginia Sickness and Disability Program. These rates tend to be a bit smaller than the pension plan. However, these plans are less well-funded. And so you'll notice in the governor's budget that he retained higher rates than the board certified rates, which are analogous to the previous biennium, in order to help improve the funded status of those plans. And so when we'll look at the funded status here, you'll see that these are far less well-funded than the pension plans, with group life at 66% and the health insurance credit at 26.2 and 18.1 for state and teacher plan. In contrast, the Sickness and Disability Program is very well funded. One of the reasons why you'll see this less well-funded than pension plans is that these used to be pay-as-you-go plans, and then the General Accounting Standards Board required that they be pre-funded. So they were late getting started on pre-funding, and there were also premium holidays and other different techniques that were used along the way. I'll turn now to return to work. This is a topic that comes up quite a bit, and there's usually a good bit of legislation that relates to this. When we refer to return to work, we're thinking about VRS retirees coming back to positions with a VRS covered employer. And we try to be very cognizant of employer needs, but also aware of our fiduciary duty and Internal Revenue Code compliance. One of the things to think about is if we encourage folks to retire sooner, they would draw their benefits sooner than we would expect. We would then pay benefits longer without that time necessary to generate investment income to pay those benefits. So that's one of the reasons why we pay close attention to return to work. Also, the Internal Revenue Code requires that you can't have prearrangement and you must have a bona fide break in service. So as I noted, we do have some opportunities for retirees to return to work.
Mr. Chairman.
Sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to follow up on the last slide of what is, can you explain further prearrangement?
Sure. The Internal Revenue Code says that there can't be prearrangement. And prearrangement means that if I am an employee, my employer says right before I leave, hey, we'd really love for you to come back next week to work for us. And so it's sort of a difficult thing to manage, because often there are these conversations informally. However, it is not, you can't really say, come back tomorrow in this new role after you retire in order to be compliant with it. And so in order to assess if that's taking place or not, the Internal Revenue Code says that you should have a sufficient break in service in order to show that there has been a bona fide termination of employment. Does that make sense? Sure. We do have a good bit of flexibility in our current return to work program. In fact, folks can return to work after a 1-month break in a part-time role, and we define part-time as 80% of the hours of a full-time position. And this compares favorably to many other states. We also have the critical shortage positions. These positions, folks can return to work full-time. These are teachers designated by the Department of Education, also school security officers and bus drivers. Last session, the break-in service requirements were changed by legislation. We used to have a 12-month break-in service required for these critical shortage position, and that was changed to 6 months. We have conferred with External Benefits Council. 6 months still seems to be a sufficient length to pass that facts and circumstances test that the Internal Revenue Service would require. Also, some additional positions were added to the critical shortage. These are sort of like school psychologists and other specialized student support positions. The other thing that's really, I think, a best practice as we talk about return to work is that our return to work provisions require that the employer provide contributions over to fund these positions as they are used. We've done a variety of studies over the past few years related to this topic. Some of the things that we found are that we generally align with other states. Those states that sort of have either shorter breaks in service or different provisions often couple them with additional restrictions, whether it's earnings, whether it's age, or amount of service. So we do think that maintaining a sufficient break in service is critical to ensuring that we protect the fund as well as ensure that we're compliant with internal revenue guidance. One thing that was different last year is we did a specific report related to law enforcement and these folks and hazardous duty positions. As you know, they have different benefits related to their plan because they are not, they have earlier age and service positions and a higher multiplier and a supplement to compensate for the risks, both physical and mental, experienced by these folks. And so we permit earlier retirement so that they are still able to perform their duties. So when we think about returning to work, for folks who are in hazardous duty positions, just want to keep those underlying provisions top of mind. So Mike asked me to talk a little bit about the Line of Duty Act. These are benefits for our hazardous duty employees across the Commonwealth. And the way we administer this plan is collaboratively with the Department of Human Resource Management. They manage the health insurance benefit portion of this plan. We do eligibility determination as well as a trust for this. State Police helps us with our investigation. The other thing to keep in mind is that this is separate from the pension trust. These are separate assets, but they are invested alongside the pension plan. Also, the Line of Duty Act trust is developed, and how we fund it is on a pay-as-you-go basis, and that's set forth in the Appropriation Act. Folks who are eligible are law enforcement officers, firefighters, both professional firefighters and volunteer firefighters, members of the National Guard, correctional officers, jail officers, superintendents. This isn't an exhaustive list, but it is set out in statute who is eligible for this.
Thank you. I wanted to ask about the Line of Duty Act. I know there's a proposal this year in Virginia to expand that to some non-public police officers. And I was wondering, do we know what other states do, if it's available in that capacity?
Sure. Senator Evan, Line of Duty Act is somewhat unique in Virginia. There are different analogous ones in other states. Generally, they relate to public employees, but there are some different arrangements here and there because there are 50 different ways to do it. So I can't say categorically they don't include private entities, but most tend to focus on public employees in their analogous programs. I hope that helps.
Thank you.
The Line of Duty Act does provide for, in the case of line of duty death, a $100,000 benefit. If there is a death related to a presumption, those presumptions are set out in statute. There's a $25,000 benefit that is paid. In addition, another portion that is somewhat unique in Virginia is the health insurance portion of the line of duty benefits. And these are provided to a disabled member, a person who is disabled in the line of duty, and their eligible spouses and dependents. In the case of a death, the benefits are provided to the surviving spouse and eligible dependent, and it is premium-free health insurance, and that plan is administered by the Department of Human Resource Management. So how do we fund these benefits? We do a per-head charge for those entities that participate in our trust. There are local governments who don't do the trust, and they either self-insure or purchase secondary insurance in order to cover the expense. They are not excluded from providing these benefits. In fact, they must provide the same benefits, but their funding mechanism is different. So it's $995 per head for the upcoming biennium. We cover about 26,000 eligible participants in that plan. I'm going to pivot now to judicial retirement benefits. We did a working group along with Senate Finance staff and the Office of the Executive Secretary in 2020, I think the fall of 2022, and talked a little bit about benefits in the judicial plan. And so I'm going to kind of try to focus on some of the things that we looked at during that exercise. One of the things that we found is that younger appointees do have adequate time to accumulate accumulate assets in their defined contribution component of their plan. And so if they do so, they can sort of align with what a Plan 1 or Plan 2 replacement ratio would be. Keep in mind that new judges go into the hybrid retirement plan. However, judges also have waiting for their service depending on the age they are when they are appointed. So one of the things we looked at in our working group was what we could do for judges who are appointed at age 50, on or after age 55, to provide them with a replacement ratio similar to a Plan 1 or Plan 2 judge. And the options were increasing matching contributions to 100% of the match instead of the current structure, or increasing the benefit multiplier, or increasing service weighting. So this chart, to try to orient you to it a little bit, shows various scenarios. So you see an income replacement ratio for a Plan 1 judicial JRS member. The second bar is if you were in Plan 2, and Plan 2 has a 1.65 multiplier instead of a 1.7. Then you have a current hybrid retirement plan member, and if they just did the minimum defined contribution, voluntary contributions, they'd get a 51% income replacement ratio. If they did the max, which is 4% in their voluntary portion, they could achieve about a 71% income replacement ratio. The other thing to keep in mind is most of our judicial members, nearly all of them, do the maximum contribution in their hybrid plan, which is a good news story. And then, so we looked at also how does this compare with the Senator's Bill 396, which looks at having a 1.7% multiplier for those who are 55 and over at the time they're 55 and over at appointment. And so for those folks, they would generate a larger benefit than the Plan 1 and Plan 2. So when we think about the working group kind of looked at this to try to think about how could we help potentially all hybrid retirement plan members. So we looked at what could be done that would go across the board. So if we gave all hybrid retirement plan members 100% match in their defined contribution plan for the JRS plan, they could get a 76% income replacement, which is pretty much analogous to that which they could achieve in Plan 1. If they did, if they increase the multiplier, again, that to 1.1%, that would get this about the same income replacement. And finally, the third option that we had looked at the time was changing the service weighting. So these were the three options that we talked about with the working group.
Hey, Trish.
Sure.
So I have a series of questions on this. So first of all, I understand these are options that were looked at to, I'm not really clear what the objective was.
So I think when the working group at the time, the objective was to try to get folks to be analogous to Plan 1 or Plan 2 without adding additional liability. That was sort of the goal. So using 100% match in your DC contribution means there is no associated liability. And so that was sort of the goal for it, as well as what would the costs be to do those improvements.
All right, so let me go backwards. I'm trying to understand, first of all, what the plan was before they started monkeying with it. I think it was maybe in 2011 or 12 or something. I mean, my recollection is that there was a policy goal that was set years ago that because judicial service tends to be very different from traditional employment service, people tend to be, the idea was to try to encourage older attorneys who had a lot of service and wisdom and seen a lot of combat to become judges late in their career, and as opposed to earlier in their career.
Right.
And that part of the idea was they're giving up their peak earning years in exchange for getting a generous retirement benefit for the sacrifice of the income loss. And so I'm trying to figure out what that baseline original thing was before the House, I think it was the House Appropriations Committee, decided to start messing with it after a couple of situations they didn't like.
So I think all your points are well taken. That there was a desire to have additional elements of the judicial retirement plan that would bolster their retirement. So the service weighting was a way to do that. So for example, you would have a 2.5%. If you were appointed at age 55, you would get a 2.5 months for every month you serve is in that. So so there's certainly different ways to do it. When we looked at, I think I might have brought it, who's being appointed when, there's about, when we look at the active JRS members, we've got about 20% that are appointed to their original term at 55 or older.
Talk about
That's across the board.
You're
When we
talking
look
about
at the
today,
hybrid,
you're not talking about today, though, like not where things were in 2012 before everything changed.
no, I'm just talking the whole group. Everyone who's an active JRS member at their point of at the appointed date, they're about 20% were 55 and older at their appointment date.
And that's a mix, but that's a mix of the people who are pre-change and post-change. I think you said there's like
Correct.
120 there or something that's still in the old system. And
Right. We have about, and so when we look at the hybrid members only, so that's 2014, so that gives you a little bit better feel for the new group. Hybrid members only, there are about 29% who are 55 and older who were appointed their original appointment. So about a third. So if we look at hybrid members only, less than 45, there were 84 folks. 45 to 54, 113 folks. And then 55 and older at their original appointment was 83. So it's roughly a third who have been appointed at that age, at those ages.
do you have a sense of what those ratios are for the people in Plan 1?
Yes, so for Plan 1, you had 74 were less than 45, 57, 45 to 54, and 5 for 55 and older. But this is the current
Right.
population. Plan 2 is a little bit different. That's roughly a third in each one. Plan 2 was a very short period of time that existed. But I'm happy to give you these, to follow up and give you these in a follow-up so you
Yeah,
can
I'm
see
scared
the
if there's
data.
any historical data that can show what the ratios used to look like before the changes were made, that'd be helpful, because it's at least been my sense that a lot fewer older lawyers have been applying to be judges and have been getting elected. And the operative theory about that is because the retirement benefits profile changed. And
I think what I have prior to 2010, there were it was much more heavily weighted in the 54 and younger group prior to 2010, which was the other paradigm. So the data is a little bit, I think for hybrid folks, it tends to be pretty evenly distributed. So, but I think one thing to keep in mind is that if you are on the bench later, you don't have as much time in a hybrid retirement plan to have those contributions gain that compound interest and develop as the same kind of income replacement ratio as you would in Plan 1 and Plan 2.
Right.
Yeah.
Which is why having them in more of a Plan 1 style system with multipliers and everything else helps to make up for that.
Yeah. So so on this slide you can kind of see, so that shows you on the for Senate Bill 396, you'd have the 1.7%, which would give you that blue bar, which looks the same as Plan 1, and then on top of it, that orange and that orange is if you returned, if you had a 5% return on your defined contribution matches. So so you get the 1.7 plus the DC. So Plan 1 and Plan 2 don't have any hybrid retirement plan DC portion. So I hope that helps. We're just trying to show where the different parts and pieces are in the benefit. And the last one kind of just shows what the different costs would be for if you increase the match to 100%, the DC match would be about $1 million, about 1.6 for some of the alternative plan designs, and about $4 for the increased multiplier. I'm sorry, $4 million, not $4. So I think there are a variety of different levers that one could use. Those were just several options. One of the things that the working group just talked about was how to try to help all hybrid members across the judicial system. But there could be various different levers that could be pulled. We're just showing some of the illustrations on how that could be done. Using a DC portion, some of the things that are helpful about that is you don't incur additional liability, and you also sort of reduce some of the complexity by not having an additional tier. So I think wrapping up, we talked a good bit about the hybrid plan, and there are opportunities as resources may become available in the future to look at ways to improve those outcomes for those participants, whether we use more automatic features. Behavioral finance says that they work. For example, our auto escalation that occurs every 3 years, we have less than 1% of our employees opt out of that. So we could accelerate that, or we could also enroll folks in the hybrid retirement plan voluntary contributions upon employment, sort of like what Georgia does. So those are a couple opportunities there. Rates have been fairly stable, and they look fairly analogous to what they did in the last biennium. That's a good news story, and that's thanks in large part to the funding discipline you've demonstrated, as well as the additional infusions that you've made, for which we are incredibly gratified. And they have really served to improve plan health and improve funded status and really generate some long-term savings. So meaningful steps have clearly been taken, but there are also some unfunded liabilities that remain. So as we think about plan design changes or benefit enhancements, sort of carefully weighing those two items is important. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any further questions.
So Trish, the numbers you presented on the JRS at the end, the million, the 1.6, and the 4, is that, I'm trying to understand how much involvement there is on existing plan members in that, or how much it's none of this is prospective only, right?
Yeah, so Rory is our staff actuary, and so I'm going to have him help me with the development of that.
Yeah, the DC match is actually, it's an annual cost, and it's for all of the hybrid members, not just the hybrid members that are over 55. The cost that was developed for the Senate Bill 396, it is prospective application, and it starts out at a level of about, it increases the contribution rates by about 4.3%. But that'll increase over time because of the way that it's written, the bill is written right now. It doesn't talk about, it talks about getting the 1.7 multiplier after you're appointed, if you're appointed after age 55, but it doesn't talk about first appointment. And so someone who's appointed at age 45, if they get reappointed after age 55, they're going to fall under this as well, and then they're going to get 1.7 on their service going back to July 1 of 25, the way it's written right now.
So when you say reappointed, first of all, technically it's reelected, but
Reelected.
the feds appoint, we elect. But when you're talking about a reelection, are you talking about somebody who has a break in service, or are you talking about somebody that gets a new term?
New term.
Okay.
Yeah. And so anyone who gets reelected, new term, they're now over age 55, they would also get the 1.7 on service going back to July 1 of 25. And so over time, this cost that starts out at 4.3%, as it blends into the population, it's going to more than double. And we looked at it, you get 20 years out, you've increased the contribution rate for the judges plan by close to 9%, because you have a bigger portion of the population now with this 1.7 multiplier. And you would also, maybe at that time, I guess it would depend how we value it, but you could generate some unfunded liabilities for those people that began with the 1% multiplier, and then when they hit 55, we have to go back and flip it to a 1.7 multiplier. So gets a little tricky with the way that it's crafted.
An original term might take care of that.
Yeah, I think the last time that this was introduced, a couple of years ago, it had the language of the original term. So it was only people who were originally appointed to the bench at age 55 or older would have this, and this year's bill is slightly different.
These mics are always automatically turning off. If we only focused on people who are elected in the next biennium, whatever, July 1 later, I think these numbers will all go down, right?
If it's original appointment only, yeah.
Right. Okay. Got it. Okay.
Mr. Chair.
Yeah, Senator McPike.
Looking through the bills that were submitted this year, sort of see sort of different repeating themes across the year, which I'm sure you see and deal with. One of them, I won't pick on one of my cohorts or up here, but it is an interesting question in terms of those who have a full-time position, in this example, school system, but then trying to drive a bus and qualify. Do you have any idea of how many, like, total employees, not just for this condition, but total local employees that have sort of dual role?
I don't have the number of dual roles. In general, one has to, if you have two different full-time positions, you have to choose between them for VRS purposes. However, there's a very small number of folks who who have this situation where their teachers are doing bus driver service as well. And it's probably less than 50-ish people on a small plan. So we think on that particular one, there's sort of an administrative way to address that item, because I think there's a way to probably make that work for that small number of folks. It's a very small number.
Follow up, Mr. Chairman?
Go ahead, Senator McPike.
What does that mean? Sorry, I'm just
So,
trying to,
yeah, so
a little bit more
essentially-
definition to that.
So I think what we would be looking at is that the individual's contract would include both of those roles, and so that their credible compensation for both roles would be included in their credible comp,
Follow
if
up.
their contract includes
Yeah,
both.
Senator McPike.
So I guess one question is the credit for service, right? And then the compensation, how does it work? Because there's two components to it.
Correct. So the way I think as the bill is drafted, it's not necessarily easily workable, but we only get 1 month of service for regardless of how many different hours you work. So with the exception of waiting for judges, but so for how this would work was it would only be the cred comp would be combined. So they would get 1 month of service, but their payments that they would receive as a bus driver would be added to the payments that they are receiving as a teacher, because these folks are actually required to do it because there isn't anyone else to get those folks to the schools, as I understand the situation.
Okay, so just clarifying follow-up. So the school bus driver pay does not count towards their total, so they only get the first tranche. The second tranche just goes off into the ether in terms of their future retirement right now. Is that?
Right now, that they would have, all employees have to choose between one or the other. But if their contract includes that they're required to do these extra duties, then it could be included.
Thank you.
And as part of their vesting, they only get credit for one of the jobs, not both.
Correct.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Who's covering the legislation? Is that somebody else? VRS-related legislation, yeah. Oh, okay. All right. Thank you, Ms. Bishop. Sorry, I thought you were going to get into the bills. Thank you for the presentation.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's all right, you don't
I mean,
have to.
I'm happy to cover them if you want me
No,
to.
that's all right.
I thought you would, if you wish for me
No,
to do so.
there's a lot there, so that's all right.
There's a lot of bills. They come into, essentially, they do come into several buckets. Some of them are enhanced hazardous duty benefits for various types of employees, including 911 dispatchers and others. There are return to work bills. There are quite a number of those. There are a few bills related to Line of Duty Act, and there's one related to investments, and then there's judicial retirement. So those are the general buckets. Many of these are bills, particularly with enhanced hazardous duty benefits, that you have seen before in either similar or analogous forms.
Okay.
I apologize. Sorry.
Okay, no, it's all good. Thank you. Thank you
Sure.
for that.
Mr. Chair, so next up was the But you can see you have a spreadsheet that's in your books. It's probably easier to see than what's on the screen. Essentially, this is a listing of all the amendments for the general government area, which if you look at the grand total, it's like $2.5 billion. But that's not a good number to use because there's duplicate amendments that do the same thing. So we're not going to go over them necessarily line by line to explain each one. As the subcommittee does its work in future weeks, this is part of the work to look at which of these items you might be interested in funding. So we'll just quickly describe sort of in each area what kind of the amendments sort of deal with. So the first page in the legislative department, you can see as there have been in the last couple of years, there are several amendments related to the second legislative assistant of the members, whether to provide them with health benefits or make them fully benefited. So those amendments are in here. There's, of course, several studies that there typically are always proposed in the legislative branch. Oh, sorry. Maybe this is better? Right. Great, thank you. So just looking at, there's several studies. There's one for the Auditor of Public Accounts that deals with more like local audits of the opioid funds. There's several compensation actions, one for the Capitol Police that's proposed. If you look further down, there's one for the Behavioral Health Commission as well as the Crime Commission. There's funding proposed for the Brown v. Board of Education Scholarship Committee. There's also additional funding for the Commission on Electric Utility Regulation that I know the chairs certainly wants to make sure that commission is fully funded. And then a couple other studies directing for JLARC for long-term care and data centers. The next section is judicial, so Katie can describe some of those.
So just quickly going through judicial, a study, this is from Senator Favola on restitution provisions for juveniles. You can see line 18, Rappahannock Veterans Treatment Docket from Senator Reeves. This next one, line 19, was proposed last year but didn't make it through. But this is Resolution Virginia Mediation Centers. They do alternative dispute resolution, conflict coaching, community conflict engagement, things like that. This next one, line 20, it's from Senator Surville. As you'll remember, last year we raised the retired recall judge per diem to $400 pursuant to a bill. The bill did not include the substitute judges, so this would provide parity for them. Moving to page 2. So this amendment from Senator Stewart, last year there was a Delegate Watts bill that increased the compensation for hearings related to mental health commitments for the attorneys. This would provide parity for the special justices hearing those same hearings. Line 22, this is a recommendation of the Behavioral Health Commission. It's called the expedited diversion to court-ordered treatment. It's a different route for jail diversion that involves civil commitment. Line 23, this is for a courtroom expansion in Norfolk. Line 24, this is referred to as seed funding, so it's only $250,000 from Senator Bagby, court-appointed attorney fees for criminal record sealing. And then lines 25 and line 26, there's a bill associated with this in the House, but not in the Senate. But this is essentially the amount that currently the Supreme Court is getting from indigent clients that were convicted, and therefore they have to pay back their court-appointed counsel fees. Moving to around line 34, you can see a few judgeships. These will come through as bills, and typically we only do the ones that are recommended to the Committee on District Courts. Senator McPike, I know you have one that has a bill associated with it. Line 29, psychiatric positions. This is from Senator Deeds, requested by the area, essentially additional positions to do more assessments for specialty dockets in jails, assessment and treatment. And then I think that's all that I need to highlight unless there are questions for judicial, and I can hand it back to Mike for executive offices.
In the executive offices, there are only a few amendments. One is to fund an Office of Commonwealth Resilience within the Office of the Governor. There's language that would prohibit the hiring of any employee that was rejected by the General Assembly as an appointee. There's also language to transfer funding to the Virginia Cannabis Equity Business Loan Fund, and funding for a Parent Advocacy Commission, and then lastly, additional funding for the Office of the Department of Corrections Ombudsman within the Office of the State Inspector General. Katie will talk about the comp board, and then we'll finish
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Evans?
Mike, can I ask, the Parent Advocacy Commission, item 36 from Senator Deeds. Could you describe that? Is that an existing commission?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Eben, I don't believe it's existing. Was there a work group on it? Yeah, there was a work group about this, but it does not exist at this point, no.
Thank you.
Now I'll turn it over to Katie.
Moving to line 38, and you'll see several of these. This is, as it sounds, a 5% salary increase for sheriff and their employees. You remember we increased deputy sheriffs a couple years ago and then increased the supervisory positions last year, but this is an additional 5%. Line 40, this is a 9% salary increase for the communications positions. These are essentially dispatchers in sheriff's offices, and there are several amendments related to that. Moving to page 3, line 41 from Senator Boysko. This is historically something that the Compensation Board has put in for. There is language that essentially requires law enforcement positions to match one for every 1,500 of the population. This would mean an additional more than 300 law enforcement officers. So this is something that historically has not yet been provided. Moving to line 43, Senator Williams-Graves' doula training pilot program. This is Birth and RVA would provide additional services in Arlington and Norfolk. Moving to line 46, Senator Lucas. This is an existing automated victim information notification. Essentially, the state pays a contractor to manage the interface between jails and the sex offender registry and automated protective order notifications. So this is for contract increases for that system. There's some duplicates here, so I'll move to line 50. As you may remember, Senator Favola last year had a bill for a jail-based substance use disorder fund at DCJS, but some non-general funds came over and introduced budget under comp board, so this would just move it over to DCJS, where the fund had been created legislatively. Line 52 from Senator Peake, this is increase the local responsible jail inmate per diem from 5 to 8, which is what had been about a decade ago. Line 53, restore unfunded positions in local finance directors, which was done for commissioners of revenue and treasurers last year. Line 54, salary increases for commissioners of revenue, similar to what was provided for circuit court clerks last year. Line 55, so as you may remember, we consolidated some of the salary levels in the smaller localities for sheriffs last year. This would do the same thing for commissioners of the revenue. Line 56 and through 59, these all deal with the workload study you heard about last week from JLARC that Comp Board did that recommended additional Commonwealth attorneys positions as part of the revised staffing standards.
I had a question about that.
Sure.
So, two questions. Number one is I assume these amendments are just trying to fully fund what the study said was needed.
That's correct. The top two that are about 10, 11 million, that's the 136 positions to fully fund the revised.
Right. And my recollection is in the study, isn't 30 or 40% of the needed positions in one jurisdiction, like mine?
Fairfax, correct. So if you look at Senator Boysko's amendments, you can see the felony workload. So that's the portion of those revised staffing standards for Fairfax is about 2 million.
So my recollection was that part of the objective of the original purpose of this study was to try to come up with a new way to determine the proper level of allocating positions between Commonwealth attorneys' offices around the state, because existing position allocation model that the Comp Board was using was based on the number of felony charges initiated and the number of felony convictions that occurred. And some of us didn't think that was the right way to incentivize Commonwealth attorneys' offices because it incentivizes them to overcharge and overconvict in order to goose their personnel budget. Was there any recommendations in that study as to a better way to assess what their true staffing needs ought to be so their incentives are better aligned with fair justice outcome?
Senator Serval, so the one that's standing out to me is deferred disposition. I know the budget language required them to incorporate not just convictions and charges, but also deferred dispositions into that workload. There are a couple other factors, so I can pull that to see what they were that they did incorporate so that it wasn't.
I understand you're telling me that for purposes of doing the workload model, they looked at some of those things. But is this idea of looking at charges and convictions, I assume that's not in code. That's probably some kind of a Comp Board way of doing it. It's something they decided administratively. Is that fair or no?
Senator Servo, let me look back. I can't remember if it's not in code. I can't remember if it initially came from budget language or an administrative decision when they were just doing the felony conviction and charges. But you're correct that part of the goal was to change the incentives and to add additional workload measures to not have it just be that. And I can look back to see if that was an administrative decision or if it was budget language that was directing
Partly what I'm
them.
getting at is, I think as a policy matter, we might need to exert some influence on how those positions are allocated in order to align the incentives with, the office incentives with, I think, fair justice outcomes. I'm not clear whether there's budget language that gives direction about how to do it, or whether there's statutory language, or whether it's all just internal to the comp board. And over years, somebody just decided this is the easiest way to do it, back of the envelope, and that's how it got done, or what. But I thought part of the original idea behind this workload study was to come up with a need, but not necessarily the policy solution about how to allocate positions into the future or whatever. So anyways, I'd like to get some better clarity on that.
Yep, I can get back to you.
Okay, Senator McPike?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, trying to recall if this study also incorporated the paralegal ratio. So that's not included in that number at all?
Correct. This is just the attorneys.
Yeah, I mean, that's, Mr. Chairman.
Paralegals are a lot cheaper way to meet that need.
Yeah, I mean, I think that between that and public defenders, that's an issue that we've got to dig into a little bit further.
Yep. Body cams are killing them.
I'm happy to look into that. Moving to page 4, line 60, career development program for circuit court clerks' offices. This is for folks who qualify for that program. Line 61 is similar to consolidating salary levels for the commissioners of revenue, but this is for the treasurers, and then same for the salary increase in treasurer's offices. Line 63, Senator Servo's amendment is a workload study for circuit court clerks, similar to what was just done by the National Center on State Courts for Commonwealth attorneys. And I think that's it for compensation board. I'll certainly look into those additional questions on the Commonwealth's attorney side. And if there are no more questions, I can hand it back to Mike.
So just moving to end out administration, just a couple to note there. You have items like line 66 is Senator McPike's amendment to fund the referendum for Senate Bill 4. And a few of these others are also bills. Line 69, you have Senator Pillion's amendment, which is to use some of the opioid funds that the state receives to kind of develop a state agency opioid data platform that that's cloud-based and can share information across agencies. And finance, just to note a couple, in 71, the bank franchise tax modernization, this is additional funds. This bill was passed last year, but no funding was in the final budget for it. So tax started this process with some internal funds, and so this kind of concludes that process for that modernization. Then line 73, Senator Servo requests to increase additional positions at tax for compliance workers, which actually also can generate revenue back to the Commonwealth as well. Essential accounts or essential appropriations from line, you can see in 74 and 75. So the big one there is this is a 4% salary increase for state employees. So that's kind of the big item there that kind of adds up. Central appropriations always has a variety of random things because it can touch almost any area. So I won't go into any more detail on those. Just moving to page 5, and this actually will kind of conclude our portion of it. So these are the independent agencies at the top there, other than a few work groups on essential health benefits and the benefit exchange. Then I'll note that Senator Servo, I think this is a bill that you have on the college savings plan to deal with the surplus funds that are there and how to use those. And then pretty much everything else in this, for the next few pages, these are all tied to bills. So very frequently placeholder amounts are put in for budget amendments for potential fiscal impacts, since fiscal impact statements are not available. So we won't go into detail on those because they will be funded if the bills pass. But that sort of kind of concludes the general overview of member amendments for general government. Unless there are any questions.
There's a lot of them.
It's not unusual, Mr. Chairman, but like I said, the bills, if depending on what happens to them, or they end up having no fiscal impacts, they they go away. It's only the ones that pass that have a cost that have to be considered.
So I get a sense, how do we decide typically what bills to hear in this committee to actually get actual hearing?
Mr. Chairman, well, that would be new. General government doesn't usually hear bills, but my understanding is that they are going to send bills here, so they would generally be the ones that cover any of these administrative areas, which, as you know, general government has a wide breadth, so it could be quite a bit. And I think there will be bills next week. And certainly, once I know, I'll share that with you so that you can kind of know what's coming.
Okay.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, so I think that's it for today, right? Excellent. Okay. Well, thank you for your presentations. I appreciate. I don't think I can't electronically gavel us out. So I didn't hear it.